everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game podcast, where we talk about game design and industry news and more game design and big minis that fly around. And I'm Shawn Merwin here with the childlike in his innocence, Teos Abadia.
It's a time to rejoice, Shawn. I mean, first of all, Pace Picani sauce was proven wrong this weekend with the Knicks winning in 5 and showing the fine folks in San Antonio that the hottest sauce is, in fact, in New York City. And then on top of it, World Cup. And there's been some exciting games. The U.S. had a really convincing win. And then Colombia will play the day that this show comes out. So I'm excited about that. And hopefully I'm happy in the future.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. And we also have to apologize. We have to apologize again.
What are we apologizing for this time, Shawn?
Well, here's what we're apologizing for. Last week, we mentioned the new Shieldlands region for Legends of Greyhawk.
That was my fault.
But we talked about the writers of those adventures, and we shared the writers for the new High Folk adventures. Mm-hmm. So while I'm sure those High Folk adventures are great, we do need to say that the writers for the 3 premier Shieldlands adventures from Unite the Factions are in fact Jeremy Johnston and Angelo Corsino. So you can check those adventures out wherever you get your fine Legends of Greyhawk content. And keep an eye on D&D Beyond as more and more of those adventures are published on D&D Beyond.
Fantastic. Yep. Yeah, and that was all my fault, so sorry about that.
Yeah, these things happen. I also wanted to shout out D&D Lorecast and the D&D Lorecast Presents. I spoke with James and Sergio last week. They recorded that, and that will be coming out in the near future. And I will also be talking to Shawn at Crit Hit the Giant this week, where we will be talking about the game design, the new D&D Encounter stuff, maybe some angels, and a lot of other game design fun. So check out D&D Lorecast and Crit Hit the Giant. And as soon as I come on, shut it off.
Well, you can do the same with Tabletop Journeys, which Shawn has been on quite magnificently. I'm going to be on that show this week. I'm not sure when it airs, but then look forward to that. Awesome. Shawn, one last thing I'll mention, which is I got a mug that has my name on it. I'm holding it up. It shows the director's chair with my name on it, and on the back it says "Best Director Ever." And let me tell you how often I tapped that mug while running Draw Steel, where the DM is called a director.
I was wondering what you have been directing recently. And that makes sense.
Anytime the players complained, I would just, hold it up and go, "May I remind you?" And so thank you to my excellent player who brought me that gift. That was really nice.
Excellent. And we have one more question. This isn't an apology so much as an explanation. Somebody reached out to me and said, "Hey, Celestials and Disguise Self. What about that, Shawn?" So in the DDB Drops content that was released for June, I had those 4 angels. And I think they all had Disguise Self as a spell. Well, Disguise Self, if you are aware or if you are not, I will tell you, allows a creature to look like another creature of roughly its same shape and size. So you can't change size with the spell, and if you are not a bipedal creature, then you can't look like a bipedal creature. So the Angel of Death and the Angel of Obsession can use that spell normally to look like a medium humanoid, as I had intended during design. But the Angel of Vengeance and the Angel of Slaughter, it will not work as it is written, because the Angel of Vengeance is a big circle of rings and an eye, and the Angel of Slaughter is a whirlwind of blood, basically.
I mean, so it's humanish.
If they cast Disguise Self, like the circular one could maybe look like a beholder, right?
Basketball.
A basketball. And the Angel of Slaughter would look like some other gigantic whirlwindy type thing. And so I was asked, what's up with that?
Well, you didn't want a whirlwind with a mustache in your game. What's going on?
Exactly. The short version is this. In my original design, all of those angels, including those latter two, had medium forms that were roughly humanoid shaped. So Disguise Self would have worked. As I was iterating on the design, those two I ended up changing so they didn't have a medium-sized humanoid form. But I forgot to remove those spells. And in fact, I have index cards that I keep with different projects. And I have written on there, make sure to check Disguise Self to remove that, which I failed to do. and so, it's a very small thing. It doesn't change the challenge rating. It's fine. But what's interesting to me is that there is no spell like Disguise Self that can make something appear as something else without going through the whole polymorph or shape change, which I didn't want to give polymorph and shape change because that's a whole lot of cognitive load for a DM to deal with. But I thought, oh wait, there's a spell called Seeming. It's like a 5th level spell. Maybe that's what does it. And so I look at Seeming and I'm like, no, that's just Disguise. It's group Disguise Self. So that still doesn't do it.
No, it is interesting. I mean, a lot of illusion spells over the editions have sort of lost their ability to really work. Like, they all, like, if you touch them, you realize, or they don't change, but so much. They have all these bounds on them. And you'd think, well, okay, well, then there must be some spell that doesn't. But no, it's interesting. Yeah, so a hole for you to fill, Shawn, in the next D&D drops. That's all you need to do, is the next drop should have greater Disguise Self. And then you just add it to all these monsters and we're good. Boom.
Yep. That's the joy of game design. You can always make mistakes that you have to fix later.
Yeah. I mean, I did the same.
You get paid for it.
I woke up this morning and realized that the thing I turned in last night, I did everything I wanted to do except that one thing. And so, of course, I had to do it this morning. And that's just, it's just the nature of things. Can't track everything perfectly.
Yep. So that's the short version of that answer. And so that question came to us, but we have other people that write to us via, social media at our email, which is masteringdnd@gmail.com, on YouTube, on our Patreon Discord. Sometimes in real life, they'll just scream at us as they drive by. Often we can't repeat those things, but sometimes it's a question. But we'll see how many we can get to today. We're going to start with David Mifsud 5110 via YouTube. With the recent episode in mind, do you have any advice for designing Megadungeons? In my limited experience with running extended dungeon adventures, players seem to want time outside the dungeon as a sort of a pressure valve. You mentioned Dungeon of the Mad Mage includes areas enchanted to appear to be outside, which may help in that regard. What are some other things you think should be included? And so you might not ever be able to eliminate the psychological effects that the players might feel knowing that they're in a quote unquote mega dungeon. There are some things you can do maybe to mitigate it. One thing is that dungeons and mega dungeons seem like they are limiters of choices, but really all games and stories are. They limit the number of narrative or mechanical threads that you can follow. So an above ground adventure might hide those limitations because in a dungeon there are walls. But what you can do in those dungeons is allow for that release or feeling of pressure by eliminating the walls as much as possible. Now, you're not eliminating them actually being there, but you're eliminating the player's focus on those walls. So if you have a large overall dungeon map, pull it out and show it, and then put it away. Because if a player is constantly staring at that map, all they're being shown is this is the limit of what you can do. Yeah. And so it feels like their imagination is limited. So pull it out when it's time to go somewhere else, but then put that map aside when you're not in that exploration mode. Do you think that would work?
Yeah, no, that's neat. I hadn't thought of that actually, but yeah, that's kind of true that I think it is the idea. If you feel like you're just staring at groups of rooms session after session, that's where you're right. It is a construct. I haven't thought of that really either, but it really is just a construct as much as anything else. But that construct weighs on you when you feel trapped by it, I guess, and versus imagining that you have the wilderness just spreading endlessly on, even though you never go there, which is, I hadn't thought of that.
Right.
True, Shawn.
Or if you're there, the encounters are all set anyway.
Right.
Yeah. It's just, you see the walls, so you feel them. Now, if the characters are traveling between different parts of a mega dungeon that they've already explored, just hand wave travel. That will, again, get rid of this idea of we are traveling in this claustrophobic thing. Now, sometimes you want to enhance that, but if your players are feeling it, just say, all right, yeah, you went back to town. Now you're going to travel down to level 4 and boom, you're there.
There you are.
Don't make them do the whole thing. Put town-like areas into your dungeons, places that characters can rest or trade or recover or interact and role play. Again, that's taking the focus off the walls and it's putting it on the same thing they would be doing in town. Traveling from shop to shop, going to the inn, going to the tavern, interacting with NPCs. It's just like leaving and going to town, except you're still in the dungeon.
I think an interesting thing too, Shawn, is that question of whether you really should be trapped in the dungeon or whether it should be hard to get in and out. Like, I think the concept is the traditional mega dungeon, it's so long to travel. And because of wandering monsters, we say, well, you're not going to go back to town. And that can maybe be okay if the town doesn't matter. But if you're supposed to go back to town, then you really should do the same thing that video games lifted from D&D adventures long ago, which is there's got to be some portal, right? I mean, that's where it comes from in video games. That quick travel thing comes from D&D adventures too, which have placed that at various points. On level X, you get the thing that can take you to town. If town's important, like if you care about the fate of Portney and Zaru, maybe you shouldn't be locked in the tomb for that long, right? Or have some way to reach them. And that, I think, is a big important part, which is that if you care about what's outside the dungeon, then you need some way to communicate, right? That's something we did with like the franchise rules in ACK Inc., right? Is you can have your base and your base can be doing things while you're inside the dungeon and you can talk to them via various means that are suggested so that you keep that conversation going and you feel tied to the world. That's something that I did in my Tomb of Annihilation campaign where they could be on level X of the tomb, but then they could talk to their buddies who are running a pirate ship and we'd run that encounter. Or they would, see how their franchise prospered or didn't, their, Church of Savras. Those kinds of things break up the action, right? And give you something else to focus on for a bit. You can also have a B team, which is something else I did, which that they'd go to Porty and Zaur for a second and, fans would attack their villa. And so the B team would have to defend it or something like that.
Yeah. So all of those things can help take that pressure off that claustrophobic feeling of a mega dungeon. And the last one is just bring other pillars into play other than the combat and the square by square exploration that sometimes comes along with mega dungeon play. Get into larger scale exploration encounters. Get into role-playing encounters with the creatures, whether they're humanoid or monsters that you encounter. And it again takes the focus off the walls and it gives that feeling that you are exploring in a real world.
Yeah, and that can be fun to just, the traditional dungeon with the broken wall and then caverns just stretch outward, right? And so you can go and do that type of exploration there, but then come back to change it up. The other thing that we didn't talk about here, but we talked about during Dungeon and Mad Mage is in Dungeon and Mad Mage, they do something very important, which is every level has its own story that's within the larger story and things that are happening when you arrive there that you can change. And that makes each level interesting, right? And so having these mini stories within larger stories keeps the interest there and allows you to change the tone of that story so that each level feels like it's doing something new a little bit and keeps it a little fresher.
There you go. That was our listener question. Now we're going to get into our news and commentary section, and we're going to start with more difficult news from Paizo. Last week on their blog, Paizo shared that they had a very difficult 2025, losing about $2 million. Well, CEO Jim Butler says that this is a result of the Diamond bankruptcy, which both caused them to lose product and had an exclusive distribution deal that took them a long time to get out of. And then in addition to that $2 million lost last year, they wrote off nearly $500,000 in additional sales covered by the bankruptcy. So Paizo suggests that they have $10 million in inventory consigned to Diamond.
Wow.
That is a massive number.
Yeah.
Massive to the point where people were like, is that even possible?
Yeah.
And
I reached out to industry folks. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they said it was, when I talked to folks like Fred Hicks and Shannon Appelkline, and they were like, yeah, given other things Paizo said in the past and the way Paizo operates, it probably is the case. Now, how you count those numbers, right? You're probably doing it for a legal perspective. So it's, MSRP and all these other things. But it's a sort of worst case number, and it probably, round up, but it's still probably a big deal. And this all is on top of legal fees spent to fight the lien that JP Morgan Chase has on their products, which all comes from Chase having loaned $41 million to Diamond as part of the Chapter 11 restructuring and expecting the company to be sold. And as we talked about in previous episodes, as this whole story developed, bad things kept surfacing about Diamond and how it operates, which led to the sale falling apart and only a little bit of the sale happening. And so the company is now going to Chapter 7 to be dissolved, which means there is no money coming in for JP Morgan Chase, and them banks like their monies. So they are pressuring to basically keep any value whatsoever, right? Lose as little as possible of that 41 million. Which means that you are trying to do things like sue the other companies to keep their products. And what Paizo is thinking is, what they're going to turn around and probably do is sell this really cheap to get rid of it and get some amount back, because they don't care. They're not going to run. They're not running a business for years as an RPG company. They're just getting some value back. And what that will mean is flooding the RPG area with these products at a low cost, which will then destroy Paizo's business further. So a lot of worry there. And Shawn, the result is not pretty.
No, the result is Paizo laying off 12 employees and then working with the union to start with the least senior employees. This may be up to 15% of their staff, but it's impossible to know their exact count of their employees. Paizo also announced that it's going to heavily cut their organized play, Pathfinder Society and Starfinder Society campaigns, which they say has various inefficiencies and high costs. They're cutting back on the number of scenarios they create, hoping that fans can fill in the demand with their open license and reduce benefits to the volunteers that they have accrued over the years. They did pledge a long-term commitment to organized play and plan to evaluate the program as time passes. They say the new Paizo online store is performing better, and they have a new book trade distribution deal with Independent Publishers Group.
Yeah, and on the Rascal news site, CEO Jim Butler shares a few other things. One of the things that he says is that book distribution has not recovered, and the market itself they see as shrinking while they're also unable to distribute. So they're saying that even now that you can distribute books again, they're not sure that market's going to recover, and so everything may be down from historic levels. They're also seeing below historic levels for hobby distribution and retail partner sales, the other ways that they sell. And the only thing they're seeing is positive, as you said, is that online store. So really tough times, and it doesn't look like it's over. It looks like it's continuing tough times for Paizo.
Mm-hmm. D&D Beyond has changed the way that they allow drops to be shared, or not changed the way, they're just going to allow it maybe. Mm-hmm. So by June 18th, drops content that includes player options, monsters, and maps are going to be all shareable for master tier subscribers. We also have noted that the Encounters adventure we mentioned, Shadows of Sithicus, seems to be available on D&D Beyond.
Very cool.
And we got another DMAP play-along pack, the 8th one, that mirrors some additional episodes. So Teos, take us through that.
Yeah, so here you are shipwrecked on a hostile shore. You wake up, and there is a cultist who's muttering and coming towards you, saying things about eyes in the tide, and then 5 aberrant death heads attack you. And after the battle, you can speak with the cultist. Yeah, reasonable concept for level 6 characters. And the weekly drops virtual tabletop encounter last week was Urban Vampire Cadre for levels 4 and 10. Fun 4E map from the Dungeon Tiles Urban set that I always really like how they would make those maps out of those. With a small crypt in a city, there is a vampire, 2 vampire familiars, and a ghast at level 10. Nice. Again, I would love some story behind those, but it's a fun setup and fun map that can inspire a lot of ideas.
Also on D&D Beyond, we are getting more adventures from Legends of Greyhawk, this time centered on the free city of Greyhawk. Mm-hmm. So this trilogy of adventures is called Secrets of the Free City. It includes 3 adventures: Shadows over the Free City, Sword in the Shadows, and Murder Among Thieves. The designers of those adventures are Andy Demps, Pam Punzalan, and Tony Winslow Brill. Mm-hmm. Now, we also got news that Renegade is going to be remaking some Essence20 games as 5th edition games. Take us through this one, Teos.
Yeah, so they had a products and announcement stream, and Renegade Game Studios announced they will release a 2nd edition of the RPGs for Transformers, G.I. Joe, and Power Rangers. Those new editions will use a 5.5e rule set, switching away from the previous Essence20 rules. They will provide a free conversion guide to those who own already the 1st edition version, so you can convert from Essence20 to 5.5. On their Discord, they did say that the Essence20 sales were basically insufficient to continue with the system, and so that system is being abandoned. They will have a crowdfunding campaign to launch the G.I. Joe and Transformers games. Later, they'll follow that with a separate campaign for Power Rangers. And I didn't hear anything about My Little Pony. I feel like that was a Essence20 game as well, but I don't recall exactly.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It seems like it, but was there any mention of why they went with Essence20 in the first place? Because that was a big head scratcher for a lot of folks. It's like, this is a Hasbro IP, set of IP. You have a game design company. We understand that maybe the game design team is busy with a bunch of other stuff. So we can understand going out to another company, but then not using 5e seems head scratching.
They did nothing that I've heard. I think all of those ideas you and I had back then, they're still probably valid, that it's probably a certain part of Hasbro that came up with this, and they just thought, we can just do this. Who cares? This is fine. We'll have a role-playing game. Why would you need it to be compatible? And now they may be looking back at it and changing their minds. And the fact that they've been working together, Renegade Games with Wizards on the space RPG
Exodus.
Thank you, Exodus. Maybe that conversation sort of led to, you've got these big properties of ours and it's not moving. How about we switch the rule set? Maybe that'll help. So I guess what it means is, at long last, you can have the Transformers and Driz Duorden fight each other.
As it was meant to be. Also, as it was meant to be, Wizards president was interviewed on Japanese D&D localization. Now, the Wizards president is not Chris Cox. That's the CEO of Hasbro. We're talking about John Haidt, president of Wizards of the Coast, who interviewed a Japanese gaming website as part of his trip to Japan. And near the end of that interview, the issue of D&D localization was brought up. What was the gist of that conversation, Teos?
Yeah, you can find the full write-up in our show notes, but I'll just very quickly say that essentially in traditional, polite way, the interviewer sort of says, hey, buddy, why aren't we getting our books in Japanese the way we used to? What's going on? And John Haidt basically says, like, I don't do that. But, it's the head of Global Play who does that and figures it out based on demand and all these other factors. And kind of questions continue come forward saying, like, but really what's happening here? And the answer is sort of like localization is extremely difficult. There are a lot of rules and classes. It's all intricately intertwined. None of which says, hey, you were doing it and you through a different partner and you stopped supporting that. Why? And basically the interviewer comes back and says, it would be great if you could address this, right? Like, we have a lot of fans here. We would want to see this support, whether it's in D&D Beyond or however. And John Haidt says, yeah, we'll continue to discuss it internally. But I think it is a really interesting issue. I mean, you have a market that has potential there, and D&D just seems to not properly grow it, and that's true in other international markets as well. And so I hope that these kinds of questions keep coming, and maybe we'll see some production there. Progress.
We get an article on Dungeons and Dragons Questers. And this caught our eye because it was described as a gateway product of action figures designed to bring younger audiences into the game. These action figures are sold in blind boxes in 3 categories: adventures, monsters, and creatures. And the idea is you can take these and put them together and make an RPG style story out of them. The company behind this is Basic Fun! They worked with Wizards on including a 20-sided die, a scorecard, and a mini storybook that sends kids on an original quest. The quest prompts them to roll the die at various points, creating different outcomes each time. What else was interesting about this for you, Teos?
Yeah, I love that concept, but there were some quotes in this article. Justice Armand says, tabletop games have undergone a renaissance in recent years, with 76% of the active player base joining the community within the last 10 years because of how the franchise has influenced or been featured in TV, films, publishing, consumer products, and video games. And all of that is a really interesting kind of quote and phrasing, a lot there. But 76% within the last 10 years. Before we'd heard sort of 50% had started with 5e. So this really ups it significantly. The article also says D&D Beyond has racked up 1 million subscribers since 2023. It doesn't mention retention, but a lot of times they've said accounts versus subscribers. It's hard to know whether that's intended. And it wasn't a direct quote, so it's hard. It may not be a big news item, but I thought that was interesting. Maybe it points to something else. And then the last thing is a quote that says, "The biggest challenge for the RPG market is the same one affecting the wider entertainment industry today: grabbing people's attention and time," says D&D executive producer Greg Bilsland. He sees TikTok and YouTube as the game's largest competitors simply because kids and adults can easily slip into passively consuming content on social media, streaming services, or gaming on their mobile devices instead of dedicating the time and effort to learn a game system.
So in other words, stop doom scrolling and start doom gaming.
Yeah, well, and I hope that what Wizards does is continue to find pathways in rather than say, maybe we need to change this game, right? Maybe too many words in books. Maybe, because it's always a worry, right? We've seen this worry during WoW as well, where people were like, maybe games should be transformed. And we would see starter sets that were basically like, board games because they were trying to appease to that audience. I'll point out that in the pandemic, what we saw was just how refreshing it was for people to get off devices and play. So we'll see.
For sure. And the last bit of news today is another take on our biggest crowdfunders story. A friend of the show, Scipio, again, is on the Patchwork Paladin blog discussing how the biggest whale tiers impacted the largest crowdfunders. So what did Scipio have to say now, Teos, based on new information?
Yeah, last time Neon Odyssey hadn't finished, so this time it has, and he takes a look at that one, Cosmere, Dungeon Crawler Carl, and Avatar, and finds increasingly significant percentages of funding came from the highest tiers. And he takes all the dollar values of the campaigns, such as like Avatar, which happened some years ago, and adjusts them for inflation, right? So he looks at, for example, that the Neon Odyssey's $999 tier alone raised as much money as the number 5 on the list of RPG campaign crowdfunders, which was Gloomhaven Grand Festival, with 5.5 million with inflation adjusted numbers in 2023. So it's just amazing how one of them can equal the 5th just from its top tier. More recent projects tend to be more complex, with multiple tiers offering more than the baseline PDF or physical books. There are a lot of add-on purchases. And he looks at how all 4 campaigns had a price tier that was a major driver of success, bringing in at least a third of the total revenue for that campaign. The price point of this key tier increased substantially across the campaigns. So it's $242 for Avatar, $408 for Cosmere, $490 for Dungeon Crawler Carl, and finally $1,000 essentially for Neon Odyssey. This in turn pushed up the average pledge from $141 for Avatar to $328 for Neon Odyssey.
Yeah, and that's amazing.
That's just incredible. He breaks this down in a number of ways. Retailer tiers aren't important for those that had it. He looks at the $100 price point, so every $100 and what percent of the crowdfunder came from that or higher backer tiers. So, for example, at the $300 level, more than 54% of 3 of the crowdfunders came from that. Right, so 54% of their funding came from 300 or more being the backing level. Avatar didn't have a tier that high, which is why it doesn't show up on that list because it's old enough not to. And Scipio also looks at the multiplier of the entry tier. So if you think of your PDF that's, you can just buy and you're in, 38% of Neon Odyssey's revenue came from tiers that were 10 times or more the entry point tier. It's 49% for Dungeon Crawler Carl and 41% for Avatar. So it's clearly a big impact on these types of crowdfunders and something that I think a lot of crowdfunding launcher people will be looking at.
There you go. That is our news and commentary section here on this episode of Mastering Dungeons. Hang in there, and we are going to be talking about the best of Rime of the Frost Maiden in our main segment.